Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Roy Poyan, and I'm the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. Today in Fentanyl, Families in Harm's Way, we're going to take a look at the relapse. Here's the great news. We know how the relapse progresses. We need for you to know too, because as you start to see the progression of this, we can intervene before it becomes a full relapse. With that in mind, don't beat yourself up if the relapse happens like that and we didn't see these stages. Sometimes these stages occur over months and we see kind of like the progression of them moving towards it. Sometimes it happens in a morning, okay? And there isn't any time to really notice any behaviors. All of what we do, I don't know if you've noticed this, is about observed behaviors. Unfortunately, we can't take kind of a blood reading like we do with diabetes or other types of chronic diseases and say, well, you're getting worse, we'll increase your medication from 0.25 to 0.50 and see how we do there. This is all observed behaviors. So your role as a family in terms of monitoring this is important. Now here's what we don't want to do. We don't want to sit there and say like they're in a concentration camp and we're monitoring their every move and we're jumping on top of them if they do something wrong. That's not the environment and it's not healthy. We're not anticipating the almost like inevitable, well, this is going to happen. Therefore, we're trying to get ready for it. We are going to be aware, because now we have this knowledge and you're taking this episode, that there are 3 stages and they are self-care, stage number 1, mental, stage number 2, and physical, stage number 3. A brief overview. Self-care is where they are doing those things that normally would demonstrate good, healthy self-care, and they're diverted from that. So a gross example would be you walk in and it's morning and you ask them, how are you eating? Are you eating well? And there's empty White Castle boxes all over the living room and there's nothing in the refrigerator. Well, you pretty much know that's not going well. That's a sign that they're heading towards a relapse. They're not showing up to their AA meetings or their Narcon meetings, and that's a sign. They're not showing up to work on time, and that's a sign. They're not bathing, okay? These are all signs that they are in stage 1, which is self-care. And we can intervene on that and avoid all the other stages, hopefully. That's the goal. So the next stage is mental. And mental is where they start to think, it wasn't so bad when I was with my friends, when we were using. Or maybe I could do it, I've been sober or I've been abstinent for, 3.5 years. And I think I can do, the holidays coming up, I think I can do it just once, just have a taste of it. See, what they're doing is they're mentally convincing themselves that it's reasonable. They're using that frontal cortex and they're using the memory of the drug and the reward system, and they get a little bit of a dopamine splash with the idea, so they're stimulated by that. So mental is a very dangerous place for them to kind of like wander around in. And there's ways of dealing with that also. So when you start to see them say things like that, that's a sign they're on their way to a relapse. And then the third one is more physical. They start to kind of create a plan of, gee, I've been avoiding that street corner when I've come home from work. Maybe it'd be okay if I just want to see what they're up to, or I can prove to myself that I could drive right down that street and not stop and pick anything up. That's physical, okay? Or they might say, I'm just going to stop by that sweet girl that was having a child and see if she delivered, how the baby is doing. I'll just pull up into the abandoned parking lot and look around for her and see if I can catch up. Maybe I could help her. Well, he's grossly misunderstanding what the environment does to him as far as triggers go. More than likely, if he's been through treatment on IOP, he knows not to do that. And he is physically taking himself to a place where a relapse could definitely happen. So with this in mind, let's take a closer look at these 3 stages and your family. Let's see how well prepared you are to understanding this and what we can do to make this part of your repertoire or skill base or acumen, so that you are understanding what to look for. When you see it, it'll be obvious to you, and then we'll raise your consciousness that way. Once again, don't have your family or yourself live in a constant state of waiting for the next shoe to drop. That's not healthy. Wait for the next success to happen. And when it happens, love them for it. Every time they're successful, love them. Share yourself. Be empathetic, okay, in their successes and their rewards. In their failures, be forgiving. And that's why we suggested you reconnect with spirituality if you aren't already connected. Be forgiving and be understanding that this is a brain disease, and relapse is a part of the brain disease. Hello, thank you for joining us at the family table. There are many areas that we want to take into consideration when we start to look at substance use disorders and relapse. It is a part of the process, it is a part of the journey, and we don't want it to happen. And we don't want to live in a world of constant anticipation, like when's the shoe going to drop off the foot? But it's very likely that it will happen at least once. And it's very likely that it'll happen in a lot of diseases. I mean, the idea of a relapse is not failure. And I think that's most important for us to take into account. It's often, just like with other types of chronic diseases, an indication that something we were doing needed to be strengthened or changed because it wasn't in step with the person and their journey with this disease. So, the word tweaking might be appropriate here. We're gonna make modifications to the care plan or to the support structure or to the types of things that they're doing that might have brought about a relapse. If we're observant in what was happening right before, we could certainly use that information. But, this isn't like the movie Columbo, where we're asking all these, qualitative and quantitative questions. Where were you? How long were you there? Things like that. Who'd you talk to? What were you thinking? It's a little bit more obvious than that. And here's what I mean by that. In the study guide, we identify that the actual relapse happens in 3 stages. And that allows us to more clearly understand, well, if it happens in 3 stages, then what exactly are the different stages of relapse? You may be asking, Roy, are you telling us that parts of this we can see before it happens? The answer is yes, kind of, maybe. And I don't mean to be, so evasive in saying a definitive yes. But it's the relapse in stages. Those stages could happen in a nanosecond, where they jump from the first stage to the actual relapse, or it could take months of time. And so just having a general idea is more of a template for us to be aware of rather than an absolute. Let's go through what some of those stages are. In the first stage, we have what's known as self-care. And self-care has a very specific set of conditions that need to be met in order to be called self-care. And then in the second stage, there is what they call a mental. So each of these are mental relapse, mental self-care relapse. So they're relapsing 3 times before they actually relapse. And in the sense that the relapse is such that, relapsing from what? Well, relapsing from the norm, okay? If they were normally taking care of themselves, then things would be a lot better for them when they hit a particular trigger. So the fact that they're not taking care of themselves is a relapse into old behavior and old habits that are not healthy for them. And they're noticeable. And those are the types of behaviors that when we see them, we don't have to always be looking for them, but then when we see them, we kind of know that they may or may not, they may have a meaning for us to pay closer attention to. Certainly in self-care, that can often be more noticeable than not. I mean, let's face it, if you walk into their living room and you ask them, so how are you eating? And it's breakfast time and they've got empty White Castle hamburger boxes all over the living room, you got an idea they're probably not eating that well. And you may want to take a look at other characteristics of self-care and see if this is starting to add up. And if it is, it might be a good idea to address that. So we go into this in a deeper way in the workbook, and it helps us to identify some of those more specific areas. But once again, we don't want to be living in a constant world of, kind of like, you're not a prison guard, and they are their own person, and we know that they are trying. You're a second set of eyes, okay? You don't have full authority. You can't demand that they make changes. These changes may temporarily not be under their control, and they may just be in this situation temporarily, and they're not necessarily a pattern of relapse. They're just a happening of their lifestyle, and they'll get through that. And it doesn't have anything to do with the progression of relapse. So we kind of have to be careful with when we say, if you see this, it means that. That's not the case. But if you see this and you're seeing other things, it may warrant that you pay a little bit more attention to what's going on. Otherwise, you could possibly ask a question or two and realize that, no, he's just in the process of getting housing, and in a week he'll be moving into a specific location that's going to be much better than the one he's in today. So with that in mind, let's take a stronger look at what some of those conditions might be in the self-care relapse and the mental relapse. Wait a second, I said there were three. Exactly, because the last one is a physical relapse. Here's what this looks like. When they're in a self-care relapse, they're not taking care of themselves. And so we find that self-care often hits their emotional level. Emotions have a lot to do with their sustainability of lifelong recovery. And so if they're isolating themselves, you can kind of notice that. If you also notice they're isolating themselves and they're not going to treatments, their treatment meetings, that would be an indication of self-care is declining. If you notice that they're isolating themselves, not going to treatments, and when they do go to treatments, they don't share, that would be another one added to that list. Or bottling up emotions, or eating poorly, or not taking care of themselves, physically, meaning they're not showering, they're not, keeping they don't have to be tidy in their apartment, but if their apartment is not normally a mess, and now it really is a mess, then we think that would be noticeable. They're not following any of the rules of relaxing and meditating and doing good things for themselves. This would also be an area that you could kind of notice. By the way, all of these have something to do with their mental status. So you might sit there and think, okay, so what if they're not eating well? Well, you may want to talk to the doctor and have him go see a nutritionist. And the thought is, oh, well, that's ridiculous. He's not going to go down and see a nutritionist. No, you can have a nutritionist come in to see him. And that person can actually do an evaluation in their environment. And we do it all the time for seniors. It's a billable item for the home health care agency. They have a nutritionist on staff, and the doctor knows how to order a nutrition evaluation be done. It's better done in the home. I mean, let's face it, you're going to call them into the office and sit there and say, are you eating well? Guess what they're going to say? So if you go into their home and you open the refrigerator and you see mayonnaise, ketchup, mustard, and a couple of empty boxes, you have an idea that they're probably not eating well. But when a nutritionist goes into the home, that's exactly a part of their evaluation. And they ask very qualitative questions. So with that in mind, that report gets sent over to the doctor. And then the doctor can sit there and say, okay, well, obviously we have a nutrition problem here, and we need to set up something. Maybe a peer-to-peer coach could take her to the grocery store and kind of walk them through, spend more time on the outer edges of the grocery store and less time on the inner aisles, which is where you find all the processed food. So, or he has a better understanding of the color combination of what a plate should look like,
or size proportion. There are things that you could set up, and I'm not suggesting too much in these episodes of putting technology into people's worlds, but there are nutrition kind of reminders, texts, and things like that, programs that can help an individual keep that in the forefront of their mind. How well am I treating myself? The same is true for their ability to self-administer mental health relaxation. Mindfulness is often a word you'll hear talked about, and other types of social interaction, getting involved in certain clubs or hobbies that they might have an interest in or exploring. Maybe it's something that they've done in the past, or they want to explore and move into now in the future. So with that in mind, employment, transportation, and other things have a direct impact on their emotional status, which impacts their ability to self-care. So we can kind of see for them, there's just a whole bunch of moving parts in their lives at a time when at 18 months out of recovery, they may not be all put together, depending on how severe their addiction was and usage was. They still may be, involved with battling off cravings and things of that nature. So abstinence is their number one goal, and self-care really isn't, or so they believe. Now, the other area is mental. And in mental, they're starting to state to themselves cognitively, well, it really isn't all that bad. I mean, or my friends were good people, the ones that used, they just got, sidetracked, and they did like I did, and we were one and the same. And, I should be able to, get together with them. I mean, I'm sober and they're not. I don't want to pass judgment on, see, their reasoning, and they're mentally, logically moving towards a relapse. When they start to do that, they're almost romancing it mentally. And so they'll make statements like that, and it'll be that they're testing, their support team to see, will you allow me to think this way? So, you want to talk to a drug coach or somebody that can counsel you and give you advice on how to respond. By the way, you should have an ongoing relationship with somebody who's familiar with recovery, because these things are very common, and they do have ways to assist you in creating an environment that supports the idea that needs to be countered and not allowed to grow and give acceptance to. It's called problem avoidance, and it's one of the 10 types of enabling. We'll learn about that in a later episode. With this in mind, though, they're in the mental stage of moving towards a full relapse. The next stage is physical, and that's where they're starting to create a plan. And they're starting to sit there and say, well, I've got a job now, and so I pay my rent, I pay these things. I still have a little money left over. I think I can afford kind of like an entertainment night once a week where I just get high. I won't get overly high, I'll just get a little high. And I know where to get it. I know to swing by, that particular street corner, and it's usually a safe place to buy from. See, they're physically seeing themselves do the relapse, and they may mention that. They may say, "Yeah, I drove by where I used to, use drugs," and kind of like they're making a social conversation. And you wouldn't believe that they're starting to fix up that neighborhood. It's looking much better now. And I saw some of the guys that I used to use with. They look like a wreck, but they said hi to me when I was driving by, and I said, I'm sober and I'm clean. I'm not going to do that. The fact was, they have no business driving in that neighborhood. Those are triggers for them. They have learned that while they're in the recovery. They know not to do that. That is part of a physical relapse. So when you hear them saying those kind of things, they're well on their way now at this point to having a full relapse. So like we had suggested in the beginning, these things aren't progressionarily absolute. They may skip. They may go from, yeah, he wasn't eating well, the next thing you know, he's down on the corner and he's trying to figure out, can he use and still keep his job? He's trying to convince himself that he can. And all of us know That's not going to work, because once he starts using, he's going to stop going to work, he's going to lose his job, lose his housing, lose everything. It's a full relapse. Now, once again, we'll go back to the beginning of this episode and identify that the relapse happened because something wasn't moving as they were moving. Do you kind of see what we're talking about now? The self-care, but we didn't respond to it. Not that we're accountable, but that no response was given, okay? So the self-care was allowed to evolve into the mental, where they're kind of romancing the idea. And, now because in self-care we talked about, well, they're in isolation, they're not going to their meetings. When they go to the meetings, they're not participating. They're not going to work on time, they're showing up late, their house is a wreck, and they're just not doing well in terms of relaxing. Yeah, all these things are starting to culminate, and now they're starting to think that maybe it's not such a bad idea. They're in the mental relapse stage. Once again, as a care plan, we didn't intervene on that variance, okay? So if we're able to sit there and say, let's get them a nutritionist, they may not, no guarantees, but they may not move into the mental health portion of romancing it. All of a sudden, they're eating more, they're going on walks, they've got a friend that's with them much more than before, and it's thwarted off the next stage. Once again, there's no guarantees that's going to happen, but by not doing anything in terms of intervening during these 3 stages, it's pretty assured that the stages will continue and eventually they will relapse. And that's why we're saying that something didn't move while they shifted into a new way of seeing their sobriety or abstinence. And had that moved and responded to that as they were making these changes, we might have been able to create an intervention that was, helpful. Often we use the word intervention, we think that we're in a hotel room telling the story of how we feel about their using. That's not the kind of intervention I'm talking about. And remember, we talked about the fact that we're either dealing with an addiction diagnosis, same person, a mental health called a dual diagnosis, same person, or a medical comorbidity diagnosis, same person. So each one of these has a relapse potentiality to it. And it's what makes this so confusing. I find it to be surprising that as we look at this person, that we don't have a kind of a case management concept treating and working into the substance use disorder forum, because it seems like this person is multifaceted, each kind of facet depending and influencing the other. It's a lot to ask for from a family. But in the absence of that, which really we can't do much about, maybe if there was a payable on a billing code, somebody would say, yeah, we'll do that. We'll provide case management, because there are case management companies, and care coordination is not new. We've been doing it since the 60s. So the fact is, we've got software that supports it. We have case management companies. We have home health care agencies. We can be in this person's life on a variance as an intervention based on one of the 3 categories of diagnoses for their care plan. But with that being said, family members are now what I just described. And hopefully this information of knowing that the stages and the progression kind of go together, and what those stages as it relates to relapse are, will be of value and help to you. And now we're going to determine a solution, develop a decision, and design a plan of action over those things that we feel are issues that need to be addressed. Like, for example, if what you noticed was self-care and nutrition, then the determined solution would be, let's get a nutritionist involved. Then when we start to look at developing a decision, okay, who in network is his provider for the HMO payment? And let's talk to that person and ask that physician to write an order for a home health care agency to go in with a nutritionist and do an assessment, so that we can baseline where they are, and that nutritionist can make recommendations that are meaningful to this person's life, because they've actually stepped into their life by showing up at their home, reported back to the doctor. And then a plan. Okay, so who's going to talk to the doctor? What are we going to tell them? Well, we're going to tell them about our decision to seek out, and we're going to tell them about the solution that we're trying to address. So in that regard, our 3Ds really do have a benefit for us using in this scenario as well. Once again, knowing who's out there and who is the provider and having a good kind of like fact sheet on the individual where you know their medications, you know their allergies, you know the types of therapies they've been on in the past. I would not count on the fact that a network or a health system says, you don't need to keep records because we've got electronic records. That's nice. They'll have the original documents always. But you could write down, any kind of lab results or notes. And then when you're in seeing professionals, give them that information. It may be information that they glanced over and didn't see, and it's very important as part of their fact finding in terms of what they're planning to do as a professional with your loved one. In other words, you are also a representation of their medical records to help other decision makers make the best quality decision. We hope that this information has been of value to you. Once again, there are YouTube on our YouTube channel available for you to view. You can always go onto YouTube and word search, and you'll get a sundry of items specific to the relapse and the stages of relapse, and I would encourage you to do that. Thank you very much. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode, and we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in, and we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response. So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved, and then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen. The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the 5th category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these 3 questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is. And now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your 5th sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, And then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine what are our values. Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decision you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of 1 contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number 1 factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. You know, your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, you know, what is this issue? And help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where, you know, our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're kind of taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. You know, is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then, would you do this would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you, meaning it was done for you or to you? Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry, on all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you know you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.